Welcome to Illinois Law, sponsored by the Illinois State Bar Association. My name is Nancy McKenna, and I will be your moderator this evening. Our program tonight is on expungements. I have my esteemed panel here with me, Thomas A. Bruno from Thomas A. Bruno and Associates. Tom is a practicing attorney for many years in the Champaign area, practicing in criminal defense, and regularly counsels clients on expungement. Next to Tom is Judge Sheila Murphy. Judge Murphy was the former presiding judge over the Markham Courthouse in the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois. And Judge Murphy is currently with, let's see, who are you currently with, Judge Murphy? Thank you, thank you. And we have two experts on expungement. Tom, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
When an individual calls you, and by expungement we mean that someone has a criminal conviction on their record, correct?
Well,
I mean that they want expunged.
The general concept is brought to me usually by people who have run into some employment difficulties. They're out there in the job market, and they've had one or more employers tell them that they're not going to be hired because of something the employer found out about them. And they're now deciding that they need to clean up their record, clean up history. And there are limitations to what you can do. Actually, expungement itself, which is a concept that we can explain a little bit more in detail, but expungement itself doesn't work for a case that resulted in a criminal conviction. It only works for cases where you might have been arrested but never convicted.
Oh, that's an important distinction.
So people want to clean up the record of the fact that they were arrested, even if the case was dismissed or never charged, or maybe they had a jury trial and they were found not guilty. But they'd like to go back and have a court order entered that requires the police department to destroy the mugshots, destroy the fingerprints, the circuit clerk's records to be sealed, and all records that had ever happened to be destroyed. That's what happens with an expungement.
Now, are a lot of the court records electronic today, or are some court systems still manual?
Well, there are a few that still have not put their records out there for the public in an electronic format, but more and more counties are establishing websites where the records of pending cases are accessible. Those are scoured by companies, private data companies, companies like Google. And once that information is captured, they're never subject to the mandates of an order to expunge a record. So to some extent, once that bell has been rung and it's out there in the electronic world, it's never coming back. You can't put that genie back in the bottle.
So an individual calls you, they have not been convicted, but they were arrested in Champaign County. Are Champaign County's records electronic, or are they?
They are both manual and also electronic.
Okay.
The danger with the electronic world we've moved into is it's so easy for people all over the world to harvest that information, and there's no getting it back. 20 years ago, when it was all on paper, you had to go to the government to find out somebody's record. If you had a job applicant and you wanted to know whether they had a criminal history or not, you really had to turn to the government to answer that question. Nowadays, people can access that information at home in their living room, and that information is largely, it often is inaccurate, but it's never, you can't ever scrub it clean again. And that's part of the problem of what's made the expungement process a little less meaningful, because you can't get back the private data that's gone out there to the information harvesters.
Thank you, Tom. Judge Murphy, when an individual, let's say that they still want to go through with the expungement process, they've spoken with Tom, and Tom's agreed that it would be a good idea. He's advised them of the risk that it might be in the public domain via Google or another Facebook or whatever, another social medium. But they decide they still want to go through with the expungement process. They want that arrest taken off the record. In Cook County and in the circuit court where you resided, how would that process work?
Well, a little different than Champaign-Urbana. In there the chief judge does it in his or her chambers, and then the attorneys are notified. I'm sure that the state's attorney of the county is also notified. The way I did it was we had 37 towns and villages in the jurisdiction of the 6th District. And so I would ask the state's attorney to notify all the police departments that expungement was pending. And I also asked in 2 different cases, domestic violence cases and sexual assault cases, or sexual abuse cases. I always ask that the state's attorneys indicate to the victims that there was going to be a hearing. And I did it in open court. I never did it in chambers. It was always in court.
So therefore the victim could come to the hearing and object to the expungement.
That's right. And really what I found out was simply astonishing. On paper there was no formal record. But when the victims came forth, they'd say, yes, you know, he would beat me up in front of the children. He'd savagely beat me, but I was afraid to go ahead with it. But then finally I did file for divorce. And in the divorce, I testified. And so I'd say, well, do you have that transcript? And she'd read the transcript of what was said at that hearing. And clearly, I wasn't going to expunge in a record if after the court dismissed the case, that the individual was beating her again or doing the same thing again.
In your experience, Judge, with the expungement process in the 6th District, did you find that the majority of your expungement cases were domestic violence or of the sexual assault nature, or were they more of the common, more of a non-domestic, non-assault nature?
Well, interestingly enough, two of the domestic violence cases we had, the defendants were judges.
Oh,
interestingly enough, yeah. So I just say that because domestic violence doesn't just apply to
anyone,
to the poor
right.
or those out of work. It goes,
right.
And we had many for shoplifting, a lot of shoplifting,
arrests,
right, or criminal damage to property.
Was there any
DUIs?
trend with age? Was it more the younger population, or?
I would say that it was probably the younger people, yeah. Although sometimes someone older would come in. I'm sure that's your experience as well. Someone is newly widowed. She now has to get a job, and she has a DUI on her record. She's going to come forward and say, you know, can I have this taken off? Nobody's going to hire me. If you know, I'd like to deliver pizza or something. I won't be able to do anything unless
it was an arrest for a DUI, but
right.
not a conviction. It's
right.
always never a
that's
conviction.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's important to note that if you are actually convicted, then expungement isn't a remedy. Expungement is no good for an actual
that
conviction.
record will always be there. You cannot expunge a conviction.
It will be there. There is a method for sealing certain minor offenses where you can seal them from the public's view, but it's not quite the same as an expungement.
Can you do that after the fact?
You can do that after a conviction for some misdemeanors and a couple of very unusual felonies. The Class 4 felony of prostitution is one that could be sealed but never expunged. The court keeps the records, the police departments keep the records, but it's sealed from public view.
So by saying it's sealed from public view, you mean that if there's a company that does criminal background checks for employers, that would not be in public view?
In theory, if they didn't notice it when it was public, they won't be able to see it later.
And is there a time limit from when the conviction is entered to when the sealing process can begin?
I think there's a mandatory minimum time. You can't do it the day after. You have to wait at least a couple of years. It depends. There's some that have a 2-year waiting period, some have a 3-year. I think some even have a 5-year waiting period.
And is that defined statutorily in Illinois?
It is.
And
the other resource that's helpful, on the internet, the State Appellate Defender, which you can find under state agencies, has a great packet walks you through. It's a PDF you can download off the internet, walks you through the expungement process, and has flow charts of who's eligible and who's not eligible.
And that's so important because the average person, when the case is dismissed, doesn't think this is going to affect my employment.
Right.
And a lot of people, most of the people who came before me didn't have attorneys. Like, they would have loved to have had you, Tom.
Well,
but most of the time it's pro se. They're coming by themselves.
And more and more with our electronic age, people's convictions are easily discoverable, and they're haunted more by bad deeds in the past.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Sure.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to hear more about expungement.